Hello and welcome to the Too Much Apparently podcast. If you're new here, this is a podcast for the deeply feeling, overthinking, emotionally overloaded humans who've been told they're too much apparently. And if you're back, thanks for choosing to sit with us again.
We're Alice and Carly, two therapists who are also just sensitive weirdos trying to make sense of life, healing, and our own brains. This isn't a professional advice podcast. It's more like the messy, honest conversations that happen when you finally feel safe enough to say what you're really thinking.
This space is for people like us, the ones who've been called too sensitive, too serious, too emotional, too intense, and have spent way too long believing that it's true.
Okay, on with the episode.
Today we're talking about being too empathetic to function.
This one is for anyone who feels other people's emotions so strongly that it becomes overwhelming.
The people who walk into a room and can instantly feel the atmosphere.
And sometimes end up carrying everyone else's feelings as if they're their own.
We're talking about emotional contagion, compassion fatigue, and why caring deeply sometimes needs boundaries to stay sustainable.
Let's get into it. Oh, I've been looking forward to doing an episode on empathy.
Yeah.
You and I were both debating empathetic, empathic, empath. There's lots of different words. I guess people will say different things. But having empathy is always positioned as a really positive thing, isn't it? Being a really empathetic person.
Yeah. It's interesting, actually, just listening to you saying that makes me think about if someone says to me that they're an empath, I see that as a separate thing to somebody being empathic.
Mm-hmm.
Not entirely. There's obviously overlap, but I feel like being an empath, or if somebody identifies as an empath, I actually think what I hear is they struggle to have boundaries with their empathy.
Right. Okay. Whilst that's not necessarily how I hear it, boundaries and empathy are really important.
Yeah.
Which is, I'm sure, something that we'll be getting into. But yeah, for anyone listening, some people describe themselves as empaths, meaning they really feel other people's feelings in their own body as if it was their own. Whereas having empathy for somebody is your ability to put yourself in their shoes and imagine or understand what they might be feeling, but you don't feel it in your own body.
Well, maybe what we're into already is like, what do these terms mean? And because I think there is quite a lot of disagreement, like since I qualified as a therapist, I keep seeing books and articles about why empathy isn't a good thing, which I just find mind-boggling because it's essential. From my view, it's essential. I would say being empathic is, like you say, the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, or to be open to considering what the other person might be feeling. For me, that includes being able to feel sensations in my body that are a useful tool for me, both in the therapy room and outside of it. So I don't see that as an empath. I think this is perhaps where we would disagree. To me, an empath is unboundaried around it. And I used to be that. And I used to be like that and can still be. I think it feels like there's something particularly tricky about people taking pride in it, but there can be a bit of a shadow side to it as well.
Yeah, no, I don't actually disagree with you. I just know when most people talk about being an empath, particularly when you see it online, what they're talking about is feeling other people's feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah, and talking about it from a positive perspective and also the downsides of it as well. For my own conceptualization of empathy, I just think of empathy as being on a spectrum. And I think if you are highly empathic, you likely feel other people's feelings in your own body. But I think people can have empathy without feeling other people's feelings in their own body.
Yeah. I feel like I see the spectrum, but the title empath, I don't know, it sets off a bit of an alarm in me, you know, because I think what I see sometimes is a pattern of people describing themselves as an empath, but actually making other situations about them.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know that I've necessarily seen that. Yeah, I don't really take issue with the word or what it means. I think it's perhaps the context within which it's being used. I feel fine if people feel a certain alignment with the word empath in the sense that they're very sensitive to feeling
Mm.
other people's feelings in their body.
Mhm.
But I also understand where you're coming at with your discomfort.
Mm.
Well, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Because even when you break down empathy, there is, of course, a general consensus about what empathy means and what it means to be empathetic. But empathy can also be displayed in lots of different ways. And then, of course, there's cognitive empathy, which can be different from embodied, felt sense
Mm.
empathy.
Mhm.
And people, I think, can get confused between empathy and sympathy,
Mhm. Yep.
again, being different things.
Yep.
So, yeah, I feel like we're already coming into this kind of challenging some of the labels and terms about what we're even meaning when we're talking
Yeah.
about empathy in this episode.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels important for me to be clear about where I'm coming from because I think when I think of an empath in my head, I don't see that as a healthy thing. I
Mm.
see it as like I suppose I see it as like survival thing,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't see it as a healthy thing. And I see it as quite different from somebody who is highly sensitive and picked up on people's emotions. That you can be that without being it kind of feels a bit shadowy.
Well, maybe we
Yeah.
can go through and talk about some of these terms so then we can explain a little bit more about what we
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
especially when things get on the shadowy
Yeah.
side.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, how would you understand sympathy?
So when I was doing my therapy training, we talked about it in terms of somebody lying down in a ditch. So the person that was in pain was lying down in a ditch. Sympathy is like getting in the ditch with them and lying down in the ditch with them. And you might say things like, "Oh, yeah, I know what it's like." Sympathy to me feels almost like it's got a bit of a hierarchy in it of like, I'm okay and you're not okay. And I know how it feels to be down there, but I'm up here at the moment. That's how that can feel to me. How would you describe sympathy?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'd describe it differently. So, I would describe sympathy as somebody being in a hole
Hmm.
and someone is looking down at the person in the hole and
Hmm.
saying, I'm really sorry you're in the hole.
Hmm.
And that's the extent of the sympathy. And it might be, can I get you some food whilst you're down there in the hole? Maybe I'll bring you some food. Is there anything I can get you or give to you whilst you're in the hole?
Hmm.
But sympathy for me is about feeling sorry and feeling sad for something that someone is going through.
Hmm.
Whereas I feel empathy is more, right, let me get down in this hole with you so I can try to realize what this feels like for you.
This is right. So, this is fascinating. So, the way I would understand empathy is having one foot in the ditch so you can experience it with them, but you don't lose your grip on your position as well. So you stay with your position and you've got one foot in the other person so you can understand theirs and then you come back to your own. Because if you got fully down in the ditch, you might both become overwhelmed and neither of you able to help each other.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can get that. So I might think of it as I can get in the ditch because I've got a ladder.
Yeah.
You don't have a ladder, and sadly, you can't use my ladder,
Hmm.
but I'm going to be in this with you
Yeah.
whilst you figure out how to get out,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. I
But when
don't.
I need to, I can come out.
Yeah, I don't think we're actually so even though at first glance our pictures look like polar opposites, I don't think they are actually that far apart.
Yeah.
I think they're just different ways of expressing a quite similar thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's something slightly different in our interpretations of sympathy. So when I listen to yours, it sounded, I guess, a bit, I don't know if like emotionally distant is quite the right way. Like it felt like there was a focus on what can I practically do for you in this situation. Yeah. Whereas for me, sympathy is like if somebody said to me, "Oh, I know how you feel," that is sympathy, not empathy, because their experience, their feelings are taking up too much space.
Mhm.
That's not that's not empathy.
I'm going to just Google now the
Oh yeah.
definition of sympathy, just out of curiosity. This is the Merriam Webster Dictionary for anyone who cares about specifics. So, sympathy is a feeling or expression of sincere concern for someone who is experiencing something difficult. Oh, it's interesting. It breaks down empathy and sympathy here. So it says sympathy is a feeling of sincere concern for someone who is experiencing something difficult. Empathy involves actively sharing in the person's emotional experience.
Mm, yeah. I just really think the difference for me comes down to, are you being alongside the person in pain and wanting to understand their perspective? If so, that's empathy. If not,
Mm,
sympathy.
yeah, yeah. So, how do we break up then empathy into cognitive empathy and emotional empathy?
Cognitive empathy, if I take it literally, it sounds like, can you think how the other person is thinking? Can you like really understand what the person is thinking? Yeah,
Yeah.
thinking with.
Well, it actually breaks up what we were talking about before in
Mm,
terms of emotional empathy or affective empathy is the empathy you feel in your body. It is feeling the other person's feelings
hmm
versus cognitive empathy, which is I can think about how you feel
hmm
and relate to maybe how you must be feeling in my head, but I
hmm
don't necessarily feel it in my body.
Yeah.
And I think it can be a helpful distinction because some people experience both types of empathy and some people might just experience cognitive empathy.
I think I have both, but not necessarily always at the same time. Sometimes I will feel it in my body, other times I won't.
Yes, I would say I can have both either independently or at the same time.
Yeah.
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 Okay. Well, now that we've established what we're talking about when we're talking about empathy,
Yeah. So, what's the difference between understanding someone's feelings and absorbing them?
yeah, I think that is a really good question. Yeah, firstly, I think there is a distinction between emotions that are contagious and emotions that we absorb like a sponge.
Okay.
And I just want to highlight that as two different things that are at play here. For those of us who absorb emotions like a sponge, that can be when we're feeling other people's emotions, but we might not have built up enough protective mechanisms for ourselves in feeling other people's emotions, where we don't just feel them, but we do then absorb them in, take them in as our own. And sometimes then we can get muddled between what our emotions are
Yeah.
and what belongs to the other person. This is
Mm.
obviously so much you talk about in your therapy training,
Mm.
which I do think is different from emotional states that can be contagious, where anxiety is a great one. Let's say you're in a waiting room and there's a bunch of people waiting to go in to do an interview. If people are really anxious and worked up in that state, our bodies will pick up on that and the anxiety can start to transfer around to everybody in a way that's not necessarily anything to do with ourselves, but is more just down to biology.
Mhm.
It's not something I'm going to super get into right now, but we all have neurons in our brain called mirror neurons. And mirror neurons keep us a bit more attuned to what is going on around us in our environment. And sometimes we can end up mirroring things related to other people, which can also be down to emotional states as well. There's a whole host on mirror neurons that we could get into and how that impacts things. If anyone's interested, go off and Google mirror neurons. Yeah, so there's a difference for me in terms of what kind of sometimes can naturally happen from a biological perspective, and then what is down to our individual wiring, our own levels of empathy, and how much we find ourselves taking on those other people's emotions and where we absorb them like the little sponge. And this is where it's possible to have high amounts of empathy and protect yourself. And I
Mm.
think there's a way of having high amounts of empathy in a way that is really uncontained and
Yeah.
can create lots of challenges and problems. And just as another thought, just to add in there, I mean, where having high empathy even comes from. Some of us are more naturally more attuned. I think it's part of our natural disposition. We are born more emotionally attuned and having more empathy towards other people.
Mhm.
And I also think people with trauma histories
Mhm.
become more empathetic in time.
Mhm.
Um, Not just because they've had really difficult experiences and so they care more about other people going through difficult experiences, but
Mhm.
because it increases people's hypervigilance and monitoring and scanning in a way where we pick up then more stuff and then become more attuned to other people's emotional states. And so, again, I think there's a difference between how we might be interacting with what we're experiencing versus how much is our natural disposition and what is potentially actually a trauma response.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Sorry,
I
I feel like I
definitely.
said a lot there.
No, you're good. You're good. Yeah, I think picking out the difference between like something innate, like being innately more sensitive, which I do think is a thing. I was going to say the difference between that and trauma, but I think if you are more sensitive, you're probably going to be more likely to experience trauma
Mhm.
because you're going to be more impacted by things. And if you have been around people that are not safe, then part of keeping yourself safe, part of adapting to a situation where if you're a baby, toddler, child, even a teenager, where you can't escape that home situation or other situations, then one of the best strategies that you will have is to watch out for what's going on with other people's emotions. So you will become highly attuned to what is going on around you. And I guess similar to how we were saying a couple of episodes ago about the grey tinted glasses and like assuming negative judgment in that episode, I think it can be the same with hypervigilance as well. So I think a classic one can be if a door bangs and you jump out of your skin and it was just the wind blowing it shut, but it connects with something old in you that's trying to keep you safe. And I think another to carry on from that is about feeling responsible for emotions as well. That, I mean, you could be directly told by parents or other people in your life that,
Oh, one of the worst things I hate is you've made me feel.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. So if you hear that a lot, yeah, you've made me feel, then you're probably going to carry that with you unless you've had some support to not do that and assume that how people feel is your responsibility. So either being told, yeah, you've made me feel this way is going to have you feeling more responsibility for emotions in the room. But then you can also feel responsible in a hypervigilant sense of I need to keep everybody okay because otherwise I'm in danger.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, when you are more in tune with other people's emotions, you can then, for various reasons, find yourself in the pattern of trying to manage everybody else's
Yeah.
emotions, which is what you're speaking to. And
Mm.
sometimes trying to control other people's emotions, not in a you're being
Mm.
controlling way
Mhm.
as in terms of how that sounds, but we can end up trying to control and manage other people's emotions around ourselves because sometimes we can't feel okay unless everyone else is okay.
Mhm.
And yeah, we could take this into so many different directions because of how this leads into people pleasing or fawning
Yeah.
type behaviors and appeasing people, of course. But bringing it back to what it means to just be so attuned
Mhm.
to people around you and holding so much empathy, it's really draining
Mhm.
to be so connected to other people's emotions all the time.
Mhm.
It's really hard if you then wind up feeling responsible for other people's emotional states.
Mhm.
And it can really affect us psychologically and mentally if we are literally an emotional sponge, sucking everything up, not
Mm.
realizing that we are. And
Mm.
then, yeah, it really impacting our own mental health and well-being because we lose sight of what is ours.
Yeah. That made me think when you're talking there, made me think about, I think, can be really common among therapists that we have to work hard on not falling into is the idea that we're the only one that can help people that are in distress.
Mm-hmm.
That can be quite an enticing position to be in as well. It can make you feel special and important and also really draining really quickly. If somebody is in severe distress and you feel like you're the only person that can help them, it can be exhausting.
Yeah, it's a lot to
Mm.
hold, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
One of the early visualizations that came to me during my own therapy training that I sometimes hold and I offer to other people. It was very early on in my training, and I was undertaking a session where I was holding a lot of anger. And I was realizing that this wasn't my anger, but I was really feeling it in a way that was confusing as to is this my anger? Is this not my anger? And the visualization just came into my head of putting all that anger inside a balloon and then holding it externally to me. So it's now no longer in my body, it's here, and I'm holding it and I can look at it, examine it, understand it, empathize with it. But at the end of that session, I make sure I've handed that balloon back. And sometimes I'll use that as a bit of a metaphor in therapy for people who find themselves being sponges and taking responsibility, where you have your own. It reminds me a bit of Up, like imagining you have all of these balloons attached to you and they're yours. But if somebody else comes to talk to you about a problem and then you take their balloon, but then they walk off and you're left with their balloon, and that's another one to tie on and another one to tie on and another one to tie on. Yeah, you end up just looking like the house in Up, probably being taken far, far away, where it ends up being too much. Whereas when you can imagine when someone's talking to you that they hand you their balloon and you can just hold it, then give it back at the end. I like that as a metaphor for how you can still hold empathy, but not absorb it and take it on as your own.
Yeah, I really like that metaphor. Although part of me is like, oh, it'd be nice to feel like I could just float away. I think for me, it feels like the other way around, like it's like a rock that's sinking me into the ground.
It's funny because actually sometimes I substitute balloon for rock.
Yeah.
And you put rocks in your backpack and it gets heavier and heavier. Yeah. So you can use balloon or rock, like whatever you relate to.
Yeah, whatever works for you. So I guess with both of those images, both the balloon and the rock, we're really starting to think about the impact that carrying other people's emotions can have on us. So when do you think empathy starts to turn into compassion fatigue?
I think there are lots of different factors that can impact upon starting to step into compassion fatigue. If you're able to hold a lot of empathy for people, you are, of course, inherently being compassionate for people's situations. And it can feel hard to admit sometimes that we can step into feeling fatigued for being so compassionate towards other people. I think people don't always necessarily want to admit that. Particularly in therapy, as a therapist, it can feel like a bad thing to admit if we are struggling with holding empathy and compassion in our work. But of course, anyone is prone to it, but particularly if you are in a helping profession or a highly emotive role, it's something that everyone is at risk of. Some of that depends on how aware you are of your own empathy, how boundaried you're able to be in terms of protecting yourself with that empathy, or whether you are like the example of taking all the balloons or all the rocks. And the difficulty is, well, one of the difficulties is if we're absorbing other people's stuff and it gets mixed in with our own and we lose sight of what's ours and what's other people's, then as far as our nervous system is concerned, what we're feeling is what we're feeling. So if we take on somebody else's distress and then we internalize that distress, we are now distressed. And so we are now going to start to get affected by those things. And it can then have an impact on our own mental health and well-being and can manifest certain things within us that was never actually ours to begin with.
Yeah. It can be really difficult, can't it? It's kind of interesting, actually, as you're talking, I'm finding myself, I'm noticing a judgmental part of me thinking that I'm not empathic enough if I don't experience compassion fatigue frequently, that maybe I'm not allowing people to impact me enough. Logically, I know that's not true. It feels like quite an old part of me. But I think well,
that's interesting because most people judge themselves for feeling fatigued, that they can't continue to hold empathy because of how fatigued they are. But you're holding a judgment because you've never really got to the fatigue or done experiencing it that often.
It's not that I never have or not often. I think it's more, I don't so much anymore. And part of that has come from having experienced it in the past and realizing that I cannot carry on. Being a therapist is a big thing. I think for anybody working in any job, if you said to them, right, you're going to have 15 to 20 meetings this week, that alone would be tiring, right? But you're having 15 to 20 meetings a week with people that are distressed and talking about the most difficult parts of their lives. Like, that is a lot. So you have to think really carefully about how you're going to sustain yourself to do that work. I think partly for me, it doesn't feel like work because I just feel like I naturally am a therapist. I don't have to work that hard at it. There's something about that. But I think I feel really aware. I think because so when you say about being highly sensitive and feeling things in your body, I feel like that is my default state. Like quite
Mm.
often, if somebody's feeling something, I know it before they do.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to be quite careful. Otherwise, I'd be burnt out through compassion fatigue all of the time.
Yeah.
I guess it was a historic part that was like, oh, I don't feel that so much anymore, actually.
Yeah. But rather than your brain going to, check me out, I'm doing a really good job at looking after myself, it was, oh my gosh,
Oh,
wait,
maybe,
am I getting
yeah.
this wrong?
Have I shut people out too much? Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Um, but yeah, it is a really important part of therapy training. People say to me all the time, like, "Oh, I couldn't do what you do." I take it home with me, and that's where I was before I started being a therapist. And you have to learn to put things down, which is can be really hard. And it's not a rigid thing either. It's not like, oh, end of session, and now I don't think about that person until next week. People stay with me. I think about them between sessions. I think about them after they've left. And there's a balance. And I think maybe what it is I've got better at telling in my body when I'm tipping into something that doesn't feel so good. And I think particularly recognizing where what I'm feeling is what the other person is feeling. So stuckness I think can be a good one for this. So if I'm working with somebody that's talking about feeling stuck and I start feeling stuck about what to do, then that's probably a good sign for me to take take a bit of a step back and be kind of like you say, yeah, hand the stuckness balloon back to them or place it in between us and be a bit more curious about it.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like what you're talking about as well is increasing our self awareness so
Mm.
that we know when we're tipping into that. And so that then, oh, okay, might need to readjust, or I might need to take greater care of myself or have certain things in place, or I might now need a break
Mhm.
or a longer break.
Yeah.
But I think so much of compassion fatigue is even just holding stuff.
Yeah.
So I know there's the metaphor about handing things back, and I think that helps you to not absorb other people's stuff. But just the act of holding a lot of heavy emotional stuff in and of itself is really difficult.
Mm.
So if we imagine that when someone is talking to you about something difficult that they're going through, let's change it to a huge boulder. And for however long you're talking to that person, a catch up over coffee, or someone's just popped round to talk to you, they're going through a difficult time, they're struggling with their kids, or contemplating divorce, or something's happening at work. Imagine that for the entire time that they're there, you're holding a huge boulder. And of
Mhm.
course, your arms are getting heavier and heavier and heavier
Mm.
and heavier.
Mhm.
Okay, and then yes, you hand it back and they leave, but
Mm.
your arms are
Mm.
still tired.
Yeah.
And then what happens if you do that again and then again and then again and then again?
Mhm.
I think it's that there's so many different, well, skill levels to this, but also things that aren't in your control either.
Mhm.
Yeah, not absorbing people's stuff. Yeah, handing it back, but also the recognition that you've still held that
Mm.
and that is still heavy. And if you're doing it once a week with a friend, no problem, your arms are going to recover. But
Mhm.
if you've got a lot of people in your life who are struggling emotionally, if
Mm.
you've got family members that are a bit chaotic or come to you a lot with their problems, if you're the person everyone goes to with their problems, if you find it
Mm.
hard to say no when you're always there ready to listen, or if you do an emotional job,
Mhm.
your arms are going to get very heavy.
Right. Yeah. And I think if you're not careful, this is where you can tip into resentment.
Definitely.
So I think one of the things for me is that I don't want to feel resentment. I think I read somewhere about resentment being like corrosive to relationships.
Yes. Yeah. So
And
the resentment leads to disconnection.
yeah. So I try and be mindful that if I start to feel resentful about something, then I need to say something. Otherwise, the relationship is going to be damaged, and I don't want the relationship to be damaged. So even if I don't want to say something, I'm going to have to. Yeah.
Yeah. The same goes for if you are someone where everybody always comes to you, you might like to be able to be there for people, but is it a two-way street?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
in your relationships, is that reciprocal, or do you feel like you're always the one giving support to others,
Mm,
but not really getting it back, or not
mm,
getting it back in the same way, or where the balance doesn't feel there? Of course,
mm.
recognizing at times there'll be an imbalance, and that's okay as long as it
Eventually.
rebalances back out eventually. But yeah, I guess the other angle now that I want to talk about, particularly in relation to this heaviness, is we're talking about being highly empathetic relationally, kind of one to one.
Mhm,
But I can't talk about empathy without talking about what happens when you hold strong empathy for people that you don't even know, for
mhm,
stories that you hear on the news, for
mhm,
things that are happening to people in other countries,
mhm.
to animals that are being hurt or harmed. There are so many types of suffering in the world
Mm. Yeah.
against people, against animals, against the planet,
Mhm. Yeah.
that our empathy can also be very switched on
Mhm.
to what's going on in the world around us. And so, even if we're trying to take care of ourselves and our relationships,
Mm,
even if we're doing a lot of self care to support ourselves in an emotional role,
mm.
it's also then very hard to live in a world where so many things are constantly, it's almost like poking at your empathy button, like
Right?
all the time.
Yeah. So how do you handle that when that's happening for you? When there's all this stuff going on in the world and, even though you've got good self-care in place and so on, you're still being impacted by that. How do you support yourself?
I mean, I feel like supporting yourself in the current climate and everything that's going on in the world could probably, yeah, well, definitely at least be one whole episode.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like so much of that links back to episodes we've had before, just about what it means to be a sensitive person in the world. I almost feel like we've got lots of individual episodes that speak to individual things within that, about things that can help and support you. I kind of right now just want to say that it is hard to be a sensitive, highly empathetic person in the world
Mm.
when it can feel like we live overall in a pretty insensitive world with a media system that is set up for negativity,
Yeah.
at the same time. So it is tricky and it is challenging. And again, it just comes back to the self care practices that are good for you. And a big part of that is boundaries, distance, space.
Yeah.
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 And taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it also actually speaks to what you were talking about earlier in terms of responsibility. So you were talking about responsibility for other people's feelings, but we can also take on a sense of responsibility for people suffering in the world as well, where you kind of feel a sense of powerlessness because you feel responsible for
Mm,
the hurt or harm that might be caused to other people.
mm,
So yeah, it'd be good to explore that a bit more about, yeah, why do you think some people feel responsible for other people's feelings or the suffering of other people?
mm. Yeah. I think it's really difficult at the moment. And I'm definitely aware of being bounced between messages of have boundaries and take care of yourself. And if it's too much to keep watching, then stop watching. And then from the other side, like there's no time to look away. This is a critical time. We need to change direction. We need to be taking action. Read something the other day that said ally is a verb. You can't call yourself an ally just by being one. You have to do allyship to consider yourself an ally. And it is a really difficult balance. It is a really difficult balance, because I think what the person said there about allyship is absolutely right. And they're saying it to a huge range of people, right? They're saying it to people who work in a low stress job, no other commitments, have plenty of free time. And they're also saying it to people who, say, a mother with young children and aging parents and a high stress job that doesn't have the same capacity. So when I'm thinking about responsibility, you can't separate that really from capacity. You've got to be including what your capacity is in that situation. I think kind of separate to that, but alongside that, there's also there's also an important point around what responsibility is ours and what responsibility isn't ours, which feels easier to talk about on an individual level rather than a kind of big global societal level. But where I see people overtaking responsibility is where they have been positioned as the one who is responsible in an unhealthy way by people that are neglecting their own responsibility. I feel like it shows up a lot in families where emotions are uncontained. And so the child feels like they need to manage how mom or dad is feeling so that they don't get too angry or upset or sad or whatever it is, so that things don't blow up at home. And it can also show up in families where there's very little emotional expression or discussion, and people are feeling. And what I find there is that the child will try to do a lot to get some kind of reaction from the parent. Like they're having to work really hard to get some kind of reaction. I think that can be another kind of responsibility that people are taking.
Yeah. When parents inappropriately take their issues and discuss them with their child as
Yes.
well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you get that parentification. So the child being positioned as the therapist, which actually I think goes back to the point about empath. You know, that is my history. That actually, as a teenager, I prided myself on being the therapist, you know, being the one that people could speak to. I took a lot of pride in that. Whereas now I look back and I think, that was not for me. I was a kid. I should have been left alone to be doing kid things.
Yeah, I see that a lot with particularly teenage girls at school, being the
Yeah.
one that all the friends come to with their problems. And
Yeah.
so much drama, isn't there, at secondary
Yeah.
school? But almost like it's a good thing, like, oh, yeah, they're the one all the friends, come to with their problems. And it's a lot when you're at school to be dealing with your own stuff, trying to pass exams, and then everyone else is bringing their difficulties to you as well.
Right. Yeah. And I'm just thinking about the difference between average mental health back when I was at school and average mental health now. You know, that when I was at school, it was probably much more about difficulty with relationships or body image or anxious about exams or something like that. Whereas now, when I hear about teenage mental health, it's serious. Some of the stuff that teenagers are holding on to from their friends is so heavy, so heavy. Even life or death. You know, in some cases, it's really a lot. So yeah, there's something there, and I think it's like a careful unpicking of how do I shift out of this dynamic that's not so healthy without losing the positive of being a good listener, being caring. You know, you can retain all of those things. You know, you can hone them into really healthy empathy without having to be completely taken over by the responsibility of being the one that everybody goes to. For me, a really important question that I had to consider at one point was I caring for other people as a way of avoiding looking after myself? So when I was busy dealing with everybody else's problems, like that was fine. Like I felt in control, I felt useful, I felt helpful. And then when they went off to solve their problems or their problems had solved, I'd suddenly be left by myself, feeling very, probably quite drained, but also had a lot of time then where I'm not being distracted, in air quotes, by other people's problems and have a lot of time to think about my own problems. I think that was really a big shift for me when it comes to empathy. Yeah.
Yeah, no, well, excellent point that I think many people do. Yeah, and within that, I can really hear how much you and how much probably people listening we value our empathy as a positive trait.
Yeah.
We're so good at identifying the things that we don't like about ourselves. I
Mm.
think a lot of people, if they were able to write down something that they like about themselves, then it might be how caring I am,
Yeah.
how much I like to help other people.
Mhm.
To the extent that for some people it can become part of their identity. My identity is helping people.
Mhm.
My identity is never saying no because people know they can rely on me. Like I'm going to be there for them, which means we always are. And
Mm,
then we never say no. And
mm.
it's really, yeah, it's really difficult. And I think maybe even painful for people to start to recognize that because it feels like such a positive thing that has a lot of meaning and purpose and something that we might really value and like in ourselves. I think it could be really threatening to then our sense of identity to start to challenge the notion that there could be ways in which this is actually harming us.
Yeah.
So I think before even talking about what boundaries we might start to put in place and how we might start to work towards healthier empathy, as the first challenge is acknowledging that this thing actually can harm us and
Right.
is not an inherently good, positive thing to be and have 24/7.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, it feels really important. So you're saying there about harming, and I think the other, perhaps even more uncomfortable, is that it's not necessarily as altruistic as we might hope it to be. That can also be really hard to realize. I remember it's slightly different, not entirely. Yeah, I remember the first time that I read about people pleasing as manipulative. And most people
Mm-hmm.
would, instantly recoil from that. But it's kind of shape shifting to get people to like you. And yeah, when you were just talking before, I could feel in my body that feeling of I don't like to be around people that are always giving and feel like they have to give because it's who they are, because I feel like the resentment is inevitable and I don't want the backlash of that. Like, I'd rather people said, I haven't got the capacity for that than to do it and, yeah, later get that kick of resentment. But it is really difficult, especially when it's a central part of your identity to have to look at it and go, ah, am I doing this purely from a good place, or am I partly doing it to feel better about myself or to get more respect or brownie points or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
That,
Yeah.
that can be really challenging, but just so important, just so
Yeah.
important. And I think it is really important to hold on to the fact that you don't have to give up being caring. You really don't. You said something about caring about everyone else, and I thought, yes, caring about everyone else is great as long as you include yourself in that everyone. It,
Definitely. And not that you're behind everybody else.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
when you were talking about it not being as altruistic as what people think, you actually took it in a different direction to where I thought you were going to go. But I'm
right,
glad because I'd not thought of what you said. But it made me think of rescuing.
yeah,
And I say this as someone that used to be a rescuer, fully was a
yeah,
rescuer. And how, again, yeah, it is really important to think of actually how this can also be like unhealthy or harmful to other people. So, taking it back to the being in the ditch
yeah,
analogy, rescuing would be jumping in the ditch with somebody and then, you clawing steps into the ditch and pushing them and helping them get out.
yeah,
Yeah, it's really where you take on the responsibility for somebody's problems and try to
mm,
fix it for them and solve it for them.
mhm,
Tell them what it is they should be doing or what they need to do, and maybe even taking it, I'll do that for you.
yeah, yeah,
Which we feel like is being caring, it's
mhm,
being a good friend, it's being a good partner, it's helping somebody.
mhm,
Rescuing can feel really good.
mhm,
It's very hard, though, to then realize that, yes, but the next time the person's in the ditch and the next time the person's in the ditch, they will constantly need you to get them out. And actually, by rescuing, we take away people's autonomy. We take away their independence. We take away their ability to learn and grow so that they know next time how to get themselves out of said ditch. And
mm,
it's hard when you have been a rescuer for a long time to realize that actually that's what we're doing when we do that. I just want to add in some nuance because there's nuance to everything. There will very well be times when we have to take over. Of course, it's not as black and white as all rescuing is now bad. I feel like it's quite obvious when people need us to take over and help them versus, yeah, when actually what we need to do is support them to come out
Right.
themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was just talking about this on the weekend at uni. And the example that the tutor gave there is if you are rescuing someone from a burning building, that's not being a rescuer. That's rescuing someone, right? So it's like
Yeah, right.
big R rescuer, and little r going in to rescue someone from a burning building kind of thing. I think the difference for me is, so when you've slipped into rescuer, it's generally more about your discomfort at seeing the person in distress. And it often involves doing something for them that you haven't been asked for, that the person can probably do for themselves.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it is disempowering. It is
Yes.
disempowering. And I definitely had that realization. And I feel like I probably had that realization multiple times in multiple ways, and can still get drawn back into that dynamic sometimes because I know how. So when people are in a helpless place, I know how uncomfortable that is. And I don't want them to feel that. I don't want anyone to have to feel that. So it can be easy to slip into like, what can I do? And well, even just being a therapist, like people come into therapy wanting you to fix them,
Mhm.
usually to start with. They want to be fixed. Yeah. So it can be quite an enticing position to take. And it can be a painful position to step out of. But it makes me think about how frustrating it is when I've been on the other side of that, when somebody's tried to rescue me and I don't want to be rescued. It does. It makes me feel incapable. It probably reinforces the helplessness feeling. And also, it can make me feel rushed sometimes.
Yeah.
I need time sometimes to lie down in the ditch.
And
That's
just
part of
feel.
my process.
Mhm.
Yeah, it doesn't work so well with the analogy because why, if you've fallen in a ditch, why do you want to just lie down in a ditch? Like in my head, it's like weedy and probably a bit like boggy and like there's nothing good down there.
Maybe the
But
moss just makes a nice little cozy
oh,
pillow
yeah.
and you just want to lie in there for a little bit. Maybe you've got a little hedgehog friend.
Right. I suppose the way that I think about it sometimes is like being in a cupboard. And it's like sometimes I just need to be left in the cupboard for me to have some space to think about what's happening, how am I reacting to it, where is this coming from, what are the options, where might it go? Or sometimes just need to be left with the difficult feeling to really be with the feeling and feel my way through the feeling. I think often what can happen is a need, people feeling an urgent need for control and needing to make the distress stop. But actually, if you allow someone to be in the difficult feeling, I think this is a really important part of empathy that I think is actually quite a challenging part of empathy is, can you sit with people in their distress without moving to fix it? Just sit alongside them so they're not on their own while they're figuring out what they might want to do or what they might need.
Well, I think what you just said there is an example of a good protective boundary that people can start to put in for themselves. That if you're someone with high empathy, but also you struggle to tolerate sitting with someone else's difficult problems and you find yourself wanting to swoop in to fix, to help, to make it better, to make it go away, then perhaps one of those protective mechanisms for yourself can be trying to learn to just allow the other person to have their emotion, which just helps to, yes, of course, not rescue, but also to not take responsibility, which
Yeah.
is a whole other heavy thing. So I'm so conscious that I feel like this episode's flown by and I feel like I have so much more I want to say, but
Mm.
perhaps we can, yeah, just quickly end with just a few more boundaries that people can put in place for themselves to work towards having more healthy empathy.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I think so. Going back a little bit to what I was saying before about capacity, is can you be willing to say no to somebody if you know that your capacity is low? So it might be framing that rather than just a hard no, it might be not this time, or it might be not now.
Yeah, yeah. So if a friend messages and says, I've had a bad day, can we talk? You can, of course, say, actually, I'm not able to talk today, but I can meet you Friday for a coffee or something, where it doesn't have to be a firm. no if that's something that you're not comfortable with, where you can still say, yeah, I'm absolutely here for you, but I can do it on this day, which I appreciate can be challenging,
Mm-hmm.
especially if this forms part of our identity.
Yeah.
But recognizing that you still need to say yes on your terms.
Mm-hmm.
And also, if we do try and say yes more often when we have the capacity, then for the times that really do come out of the blue, when someone really needs us and they need us now, that we're also going to have the energy to actually to then prioritize that person, when they really need it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think capacity is definitely important.
Yeah.
Learning to say no or delay when you've got the capacity is
Yeah.
important. So we've said like listening, not trying to fix.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, trying to give the balloon back or the stone.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something about trusting the other person's ability to figure it out for themselves. Like this was quite extreme, but after my dad died, I was not available for loads of the things that I thought were essential, and life carried on as normal without me, which is a bit like, oh, maybe I'm not that important, but also it was really helpful because sometimes now when I find myself being like, but I have to, I ask myself, what would I do? What would everybody do if I died? They would find a way to carry on. They would figure something out. Yeah. So it's a bit of an extreme question to ask yourself, but it's effective.
No, I definitely think that helps. I think that when people feel like they can't possibly have time off work,
Yeah.
or they're the only one that does their job, it's like, well, if something happened and you're in the hospital for 3 months from tomorrow,
Yeah.
the work would get done. Someone somewhere would have to make a decision. And so I think there are often many things that we tell ourselves that we simply cannot do. And it is usually not actually the case. I'm not saying that that's easy or there aren't consequences, but we can be quite absolute in our thinking and it's not. Yeah. So I think that's a good way of recognizing that it's not actually the case.
Yeah.
If you've ever felt overwhelmed by how deeply you care about people, you're in good company here.
Empathy is a beautiful quality, but it needs boundaries to be sustainable.
Caring doesn't have to mean carrying everything.
Next time, we're talking about too imaginative to be ordinary. We'll be looking at creativity, daydreaming, inner worlds, and why imagination isn't childish or escapist. It's how humans explore meaning, possibility, and hope.
But for now, we'll leave you with this. What emotions in your life might not actually be yours to carry?
That's all from us today. If this episode made you feel a bit less alone, the best way to help us reach more people is to subscribe, rate the podcast, and follow Too Much Apparently on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
Those simple clicks help other sensitive humans find us when they need it most. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon.